this kind of weight inclusive approach, it basically means like, let's step away from the pursuit of weight loss and tease apart health from that. And let me and my body decide what I'm going to take as a tool and what am I going to get rid of. And then you decide.
I'm Kristin Dovbniak, holistic nutritionist and mama of two, and this is the Healthy Balanced Mama podcast, a podcast about ditching the diet dogma, embracing intuitive eating, real food, and living healthy, happy, and whole. Please note the information and opinions on this podcast are intended for information and inspiration only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Please consult with your healthcare practitioner before making any changes. Now, onto the show. Hey there, Healthy Mamas. Kristin Dovbniak back for another episode of the Healthy Balanced Mama podcast. Today, I am so thrilled to have another guest on with me today. I know the information she is going to share with you is going to impact so many of you like it has for me. Julie Duffy Dillon is a nutrition therapist, podcaster, eating disorder specialist, and author. She's the host of the Love Food podcast, one of my personal favorites, and the creator of the program PCOS and Food Peace. So without further ado, welcome, Julie.
Thanks,
can you
Kristin.
just first tell listeners who don't know who you are, I've already given you a little introduction, but just a little more about you and what you do.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me to chat. And like you said, I'm a registered dietitian and I help people to feel more at home in their own skin. And I specialize in helping people with PCOS. And the reason behind that, well, I really didn't want to work with medical conditions anymore. But when I was working as an eating disorder dietitian, I kept working with people with PCOS. And I'm like, wow, this condition seems to be like the breeding ground for eating disorder behavior. And the pressure to diet and to exercise a lot, no matter what it took to be smaller, it just was really intense for my clients. And, I don't have PCOS. So I had to learn that basically they were just pressured so much to cut things out. And at this point in my career, I'd already decided that diets don't work for most people. So I wasn't going to be putting anyone on a diet anymore. So I had to kind of just figure out another way to help people with PCOS. And luckily, I found some clinicians that were trained in working with PCOS outside of weight. And one person in particular, her name is Monica Woolsey. She's someone that took me under her wing and trained me. And unfortunately, she passed away in 2017. But I'm really grateful for her because she helped me to understand some of the complicated physiology with PCOS and why focusing on weight is just torture and futile and not even really the point. So since then, I've been doing lots of different projects like with media and speaking and like you said, a podcast called Love Food, and really hoping to connect with as many people with PCOS as possible to help them to know that like you don't have to torture your body anymore. There's other ways to.
So polycystic ovarian syndrome, otherwise known as PCOS, like you were saying, is so common among women. And I know that I encounter it with many women I counsel on intuitive eating, and I truly wish that there were more dietitians like you and doctors that approach PCOS with the non-diet HAZE approach that I could just refer them to, because I'm not the expert on that. So for my listeners who don't even know what PCOS is, could you just give a brief overview of the condition and what the traditional treatment approach would be?
Sure. So PCOS is an endocrine condition or endocrine disorder that has metabolic and reproductive consequences. And what that basically means is that metabolically, this hormonal kind of dysregulation or whatever you want to call it ends up causing things like insulin to be higher than normal for most people with PCOS, and it also causes things like cholesterol and blood pressure issues. And then, and this is how most people think of PCOS, it also has this reproductive side to it. The consequences for a lot of people ends up being infertility and endometriosis, or kind of troubles with period or painful periods, or just issues with ovulation in general. And it can look really different from person to person. And so, a lot of times when we talk about it, it has like such a big big range of symptoms, which can be really frustrating for clients I work with. I don't know if you've experienced this too, but like it can look different from person to person. And so a lot of times people are like, do I even really have this thing? And so yeah, the part about PCOS that's frustrating is that it affects so many people, but yet it's really poorly researched. And right now, the traditional treatment, like the primary treatment method for PCOS is weight management. Also, you'll hear it referred to as like lifestyle modification. And, just like the rest of the world, people with PCOS have different shapes and sizes. Like they come in every shape and size. And yet, so there's people with PCOS who are walking around who are not in larger bodies. And yet lifestyle modifications and weight management are the primary ways that people are told to manage the condition. And so it ends up being this really messy thing, in my opinion, because, pursuing weight loss, we don't have a way to do that actually helps most people. And what about people whose weights are not larger than what someone deems unacceptable? What are they supposed to do? So this traditional treatment has a lot of problems with it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So my listeners may or may not know that I was actually diagnosed with PCOS about 3 years ago. And I am in a smaller body. And I was actually, I had just finished competing in a fitness competition. So I've talked about this in a recent episode. This is years ago when I was in a very unhealthy place in my life in terms of my fitness and my health or lack thereof. And I remember my midwife who, works as kind of like a gynecologist for me. I remember her looking at me and going, well, you don't need to lose weight. And she really didn't have an answer for me as to, she's like, well, just keep your blood sugar balanced. And there was really no answer for me as to what I could do to manage my PCOS, to manage my symptoms at the time. I mean, part of it was the fact that I was very underweight because of the fitness competition that I had been participating in, but I wasn't getting a period. And there were all these symptoms and she had no answers for me. And my MD actually almost dismissed it. She saw my test results and she saw, I had high androgens and that I was missing my period. And I had actually, since I was a preteen, I had a lot of menstrual issues. And she was sort of like, I don't think you really have this. Just like a lot of women, like you were saying, are wondering, like, do I really have this? And what do I do if I'm not in a place to lose weight? So why is losing weight not the answer to fixing PCOS?
Mm-hmm. Well, because I feel like there's so many different reasons why it's not the answer, but really what, like your experience going to the doctor and having them just like look at your body and then judge whether or not you have this condition, and not really taking in fact, like, I mean, sometimes we can find out things by looking at a person's like the high androgen levels. I'm like pointing to my chin, like having more facial hair. That could be a way to look at someone and to be able to identify some things going on. But basically body size, what you were experiencing is how fat phobia was affecting your medical care because they were saying, well, you don't weigh enough to have PCOS. And that's where fat phobia and really the stigma against body sizes is getting in the way of treating this really complicated condition because it's only looking at weight, which is really just like, is someone's body conforming to what I think they should look like? And, what it doesn't really take into account is what are actually your behaviors? What's your like chemistry, what's your lab value showing? How are you actually feeling? Like, do you have a lot of energy or do you feel like crap all the time? Do you, are you having infertility? Like digging just a little bit deeper actually gives so much more of the story. And, a lot of people I talk to with PCOS, they'll tell me that when their weight is suppressed or when they're doing unhealthy things to manage their body weight and over-exercising, under-eating, and feeling horrible, they often were under the radar from the PCOS realm. And they had classic symptoms, like they had like no period or the facial hair. They had some of the things that normally would show that's PCOS happening. But because they were weight suppressed, it just was like, oh, then you're fine. And like you were saying too, you were kind of alluding to, like they kind of were like rewarding you because your weight was lower. And so how that, and also you were so not in a healthy place, it sounds like, and how like medically that just wasn't good medicine. And so, like pursuing that weight loss doesn't really fix it because first of all, it's not sustainable for most people. And then also it's missing out on a good portion of people with this condition. And it's actually not improving health. It may initially for like 3 to 6 months, a lot of the PCOS research, when we look at it, it's only 6 weeks, 12 weeks, sometimes 6 months long, but that's considered the long-term research in PCOS. And when we look at things that can look a year out or 2 years out or 5 years out, these types of traditional treatment methods really don't work long-term. They don't help ovulation. They won't help insulin levels just because not only can we not do it, but it also leads to things like inflammation, which is a big part of PCOS. And, that's something that I think is missing out a lot of the PCOS conversations is chronic dieting or long-term weight suppression like you were experiencing, or just even yo-yo dieting, like doing any of those things. Long-term, what we know is that it increases inflammation. And short-term dieting seems to lower inflammation, but long-term it doesn't. And I don't know about you, but I'm like, long-term seems better as a dietitian.
Yes.
Not just the short-term. And what that means for PCOS, though, is this chronic pro-inflammatory state is already going on with PCOS. And so then when you throw chronic dieting and yo-yo dieting and all those things that go with the typical diet experience, that just makes more inflammation. And inflammation for PCOS makes a person feel just like they have zero energy. And it's not just like me fatigued from sleep deprivation from my colicky kid who never slept, but just like, and you could probably explain it more than me, but my clients tell me it's like an exhaustion, like you cannot get up. And then every cell in your body is like, you need to eat carbs at the same time because of this inflammatory experience. The body's insulin levels are really high because that's what happens in inflammation. And so then that's the one thing people are told to cut out. So then it's like this primal need that it's going to feel like a person literally wants to die, not wants to die, but it's going to make their body feel like it's dying if they don't get it. Yeah. So weight loss pursuits are not going to fix it. They just aren't for most people.
Yeah. And I think what a lot of women and a lot of society forgets is that PCOS is a lifelong condition. That's not to say that it's not something that can be managed well, but it's not something that's just going to be fixed in the short term. It's not like, you have a cut on your leg and as long as you treat it well, then it will, eventually heal. It's something that it needs to be managed well. And if we're using short-term type efforts to try and manage something that is a long-term condition, it's not going to work long-term. And I can so relate to that. That was the exhaustion was actually the reason I went to the doctor for blood tests. That and the fact that I was concerned that it had been a long time since I hadn't gotten my period, even though, I had had struggles my whole life. It was that exhaustion. And I knew that, okay, well, I'm trying to, get, into a healthier place after this fitness competition that I was doing. But no, it was that exhaustion that I can't even explain. Like I was my 2-year-old, I was playing with her in the afternoon and I would like fall asleep, sitting playing with her, because not fall asleep, but I would doze off sitting there, and I was like, I need to go. And that's when she did the test and she was like, oh yeah, you've got the classic, PCOS androgens at least. So I really appreciate you talking about how it's not just weight loss. That's not the answer. So what does it mean then to have a weight neutral, body positive approach to PCOS treatment?
So what it means, let me see. Gosh, it means a lot of things. But what I think about is it's not fighting your body anymore. And what I encourage people with PCOS to consider is that their body is telling them that this hurts for a reason. It's not that you have to make your body hurt. You don't have to be hungry. You don't have to starve yourself and overexercise when you don't. Like if you're not feeling like you want to move your body, that's your body telling you something that's really prized information. And I feel like, again, I don't have PCOS, so I can't say I understand. I try really hard, but I can't really understand it. But the one thing that I get that it's different is I feel like the body with PCOS, it has a more direct line of communication than those of us without it, because that exhaustion you are feeling, it's like a really intense feeling. Or those carb cravings, they are primal cravings. And for me, without PCOS, a craving's more like a nag. It's kind of like, you kind of want this right now. It's so much more ambiguous, but it's like a bullhorn or a megaphone with PCOS. It's so much more direct. And I feel like we should really encouraging people with PCOS to listen to that and learn from it. And we don't know very much about PCOS. We really should know more because of how many people are affected by it, but we don't. And so what we know is that a person can figure out through their own individual experiences what helps them and what doesn't. But what gets in the way is if there's that pursuit of weight loss, if there's any kind of just like getting on the scale and hoping for it to be less, that seems to be the one thing that keeps that from happening, keeps that mind-body connection from really being clear. And so does just dieting in general. So if someone's not eating enough, they're going to feel that extreme fatigue and constant carb cravings. And so what the body needs and doesn't need isn't going to be as clear. It's just going to be like a constant like alarm. I grew up in the Midwest where tornado alarms happened every Monday at noon. And it was like this really really loud alarm. And I almost picture, I can't believe I made that sound on a podcast, but I almost picture someone who's like constantly pursuing weight loss with PCOS and having those cravings and exhaustion. It's like that alarm is going off all the time. And so you can't hear anything else. Everything else is going to be like, you can't hear it. You can't connect with it. But when a person starts to move away from dieting and eats enough, which what's enough? Well, that just depends on the person. And honestly, I feel like we all need more food than we probably think we need because of our diet culture we live in. Summer Innanen is a health coach that she often says, like, she uses some curse words with it, so I won't say it, but like she says, like, as grown blank people, we need more food than we think, and I really think that with PCOS as well, because of that pro-inflammatory state, the body is constantly going through repair work, and so we need more food. So this kind of weight inclusive approach, it basically means like, let's step away from the pursuit of weight loss and tease apart health from that. And let me and my body decide what I'm going to take as a tool and what am I going to get rid of. And then you decide, like you get to decide what works and what doesn't. And until science catches up with it, that's just the way we need to be doing things with PCOS is like, let's just help you individually, one person at a time.
That is so awesome. I love that. And it's almost, when you were talking about how much stronger those cues are in many women with PCOS, I'm thinking it's almost a gift that they have this, like, these intense and I remember experiencing those carb cravings. Thankfully, I've gotten to a healthier place now and I don't experience them like I did before. But, that extreme fatigue, those intense carb cravings, our body is yelling at us, like you were saying, rather than that, that subtleness that, some other women might experience. We can respond to that. But if we are dieting and we're focusing on our weight and we're not responding to that, then we're not, accepting that as, a gift. Maybe PCOS doesn't feel like a gift, but the fact that we can manage it naturally by tuning into our bodies really is. And the fact that our body is telling us, listen, you need to tune in.
It's like a mom yelling at their kid that's like running into the street. You like scream really loud.
Yeah.
And that's what the body's doing. It's like, please, we're trying to like keep you alive. This is not working.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So then, where do you recommend someone with a PCOS diagnosis who wants to take this non-diet HAES approach to PCOS even start? It's obviously important to manage symptoms and prevent those comorbidities, but can we do that without dieting? Where would they even start?
It's a really hard sell, but the first step that I think for anyone with PCOS, and actually anyone that I work with, even if they have PCOS or not, is to move away from that pursuit of weight loss. And I say that because until we move away from that, we're not going to be fueling our body enough. And our food is going to have so many conditions on it that there's not going to be permission to eat. And when we don't have permission to eat, our brain is going to be fixated on food, and food's going to control our life in a way that it wasn't really designed to. Like, food controls us because we do need it to stay alive, and we want it to control us in that way, but we don't want to be thinking about it all the time. And the thing about PCOS in particular is once a person does start to eat enough, that really loud alarm kind of experience starts to be quieter. And then there's this like nuance that starts to bubble up where my clients will say, I notice when I eat, I don't know, let me think of something random, Greek yogurt, I get a headache and I feel sluggish. But then when I eat regular yogurt, which I don't know, Noosa yogurt, I don't know, some other kind, I feel great. It gives me energy. It's like specific kind of, I call it like intel. Like it's like specific data that helps the body and the mind work together to then communicate, hey, this is something that is fueling for us, and this is not. And it's really not until a person moves away from dieting and then starts to get that really individual kind of data points where then some of the health condition side of PCOS start to ease up. And, people often are concerned about diabetes, which, what is it, like 40% of people with PCOS end up with prediabetes by the time they're 40, something like that. So yeah, I mean, it's a concern for sure. And dieting chronically is only going to make blood sugar worse and insulin worse. So it will sound counterintuitive to say, like, stop pursuing weight loss and stop restricting sugar, and that's going to help my diabetes outcomes. Yes, it will, because by healing your relationship with food and eating enough, it'll help you then to be able to discern which foods you actually feel like energize you. And once a person's at that place, that's when insulin levels are coming down and blood sugar is coming down and blood pressure, all these other things that we think about with PCOS. Ovulation improves. So yeah, like it'll feel counterintuitive at first. And again, I always feel like it's like a hard sell to be like, yeah, you kind of need to do the opposite of what everything that you've been told to do to help manage these conditions for a little while, but you have to heal. And it's not that healing our relationship with food doesn't help prevent diabetes. It does help prevent it. It just is going to take some mess in the beginning to get there. And you really need things like that rebellion. Like a lot of times people experience binging after they've been restricting. Like we need to experience that in order to heal. And so again, it'll feel like, oh my gosh, that's going to make my blood sugar worse. And maybe initially it will, but it's like you have to think of the long haul here. And it's going to be messy in the middle. But then eventually you'll get to the place where you feel like it's not necessarily the other side, but it'll just feel more at ease, and you'll feel more clarity for you.
Yeah. Oh, and you know what? I'm living proof that, after my PCOS diagnosis, and I had actually, I had met with an intuitive eating counselor, and I had read the book, but I'd met with an intuitive eating counselor, and I really wanted to get to a place where I wasn't obsessing over food anymore. I've told my story here on the podcast, but I had an eating disorder, and then I didn't, and then I got into fitness, and then it was more disordered eating, and I really wanted to get into this healthy place. And, I was sharing with her that, I had PCOS and that I was nervous that by ditching dieting entirely, that I would be able to find a healthy place. And I knew that we wanted to try for our second daughter, but I was not ovulating when I should be. And I still didn't have a cycle. And it really wasn't until I stopped completely, like dieting entirely. I stopped tracking everything. I stopped worrying about my carbs and started literally just tuning in to my body. And I was able to, my cycle came back, and it came back regularly. I was able to conceive my second daughter. And when I went back to my midwife, actually on Monday of this week, she asked me how my cycles were. And I'm like, they're regular. And she was like, what? I was like, yeah. And she's like, have you done anything different? I'm like, not since we last talked, because I'm just tuning in and listening to my body. And I hope that's encouragement for women who are listening, just as a real life example of what you're explaining, that, it seems counterintuitive, but it's not, because our body gives us the signals that we need.
You just have to trust it for sure. And that could be hard when you've been told you can't trust it.
Yes. Yeah. And so that actually leads me into the next question I have, which I know women who have PCOS and are listening and are like, okay, I'm sold. I'm not dieting anymore. How do you talk to your doctor or health professional about the fact that you will no longer be pursuing weight loss as an active goal? I know that, women are scared that the doctor will retaliate against that.
And isn't that so sad? Like even that word retaliate. I mean, it's true, right? I mean, I feel like that's what people have been telling me for so long with PCOS is that doctors will literally like yell at them to lose weight. And even people who will be telling me that their amount of food that they're allowing themselves is way below what anyone would ever recommend, but doctors are still saying you just need to eat less. Either they're not believed or they just need to try harder. And so part of me wants to just acknowledge like it's a challenge. And for some people, they just choose not to tell their doctor. And you know what? That's fine. If you have access to shop around and to find some other doctors, I would encourage you. There are some doctors, it's not an exhaustive list, but there's many doctors you can find who are weight inclusive, or at least people who are not pursuing weight loss anymore have put on a list. It's called Fat Friendly Docs or fatfriendlydoctors.com. And so people who have found just practitioners in general that they think are supporting them without pushing weight loss, they'll put them on there. So it may not be a doctor who's like saying that they are, but they at least are, comprehensive and compassionate in their care outside of weight. But, I've learned a few things from clients and reading work from Reagan Chastain. She's a fat activist who is someone that I've read a lot of her work. And one of the things that she has said is she actually has on her blog, I can send you the link and so you can put it in the show notes if you want, but she has these like really great prompts you can say to the doctor. And one of them, especially if someone has an eating disorder history, a person can say to their doctor, like, listen, I have an eating disorder history. The talk of the pursuit of weight loss in any way or dieting will set me up to relapse. And my eating disorders are fatal. And so I cannot talk about dieting or weight loss ever again, period. And so that's one avenue. The other one that Reagan has outlined in this like prompt from this blog post, one that a lot of my clients will use is that they'll say to their doctor when they bring up weight loss or weight is, listen, I've tried weight loss in every shape or form for the last, 20 years or whatever, and it hasn't worked for me. I need to hear another option. And then another one is, what do you tell your smaller clients with PCOS? How do you tell them to manage the condition? You can use this for a lot of stuff too. Like someone has bad knees. You can say like, hey doctor, what do you tell your thinner clients with bad knees what do you tell them to do? They'll probably say like, I recommend physical therapy or something like that. Yeah. So those are like three that always come to mind. But advocating for yourself with PCOS is very challenging. And so sometimes my clients do say that at times they just like go to the doctor expecting to hear the same speech. They kind of just roll their eyes in their head and then carry on. And I just have to say that is just horrible. I feel like it's lazy medicine. They shouldn't be doing this. Not the clients, but the physicians and healthcare providers, because we know in the evidence that diets don't work long term. And so let's think of another way. And then also when a person can't advocate, I just hope they have compassion for themselves that they shouldn't have to do this,
Yes.
So give yourself some grace when you need it, as much as even when you don't think you need it. Give yourself some grace in this matter, for sure.
Well, thank you. That was great. And I will I'll get those links for you and put those in the show notes for sure. So I would love to transition into some of the common questions about just managing PCOS. And you already talked about some of this, but let's talk about the $1 million question then. What about carbs? I know that, I kind of talked about when I was first diagnosed, this was one of the first things managed. It was like, or talked about was that just manage your carbs, just, balance your blood sugar. You'll just have to watch your carbs forever, which was what I was told. And so the flip side of this is those intense carb cravings that, you're talking about most women with PCOS experience. So can you kind of talk about the role of insulin resistance in PCOS? And does this mean we need to cut out carbs for good? I think you already answered that, but.
Yeah. I was recently interviewed on the Heavy Flow podcast, which is the woman's name is Amanda Laird. I hope I'm saying her last name correctly. And she's someone with PCOS. And one of the things that I was talking about was like that primal urge to eat carbs and sugar that happens with PCOS, especially when it's not being managed in the way that a person probably wants to manage it. So insulin levels are super high, inflammation is really high. And how that craving again is just like almost like feels like an animal. Like I have to eat this whole loaf of bread. I have to eat all these cookies, and how it'll feel like I'm going to die if I don't have it. And she was like, no one's ever told me that before, but that's exactly how I feel it. And and I feel like that right there to me, when she was saying that, I'm like, yes, because cutting out carbohydrates, well, if you are a robot or like looking at it in a petri dish or something like that, sure, cutting out carbohydrates will bring down blood sugar or bring down insulin levels or help with inflammation. But we are not robots or a petri dish. And the long-term management of this ends up making those things worse. And it feels like torture because taking out carbohydrates to me is like putting the cart before the horse. It's trying to control a condition by removing something that the body is screaming it needs. And instead, I have like a 12-step system I take people through. And I think talking about carbohydrates is either number 9 or number 10. And honestly, those last few ones are really almost end up being not really important, because when my clients find ways to manage their PCOS and bring down insulin levels, carbs just sort themselves out. It just ends up becoming a moot point. And so what I think about carbs is that they are not what you should be even looking into. Your body will let you know what to do with them. And when your body is screaming it needs carbs, what I encourage my clients to do is to, like, that's a sign that insulin is high and or inflammation has gotten worse. So it's a sign that like the PCOS needs something. It may be you need better sleep, or a sleep disorder has developed, or you're extra stressed out right now, or you haven't been eating enough, or you've been exercising more and not eating enough to support that movement. I really want people to take a step back whenever they feel these intense cravings as, oh, this is my body's way of telling me I need something or something has changed. And so instead of focusing so much on carbs is instead focusing, okay, how much do I need to eat to feel energized? And, the other part of it is I do think people with PCOS probably just need more protein. I don't necessarily think they need to have something a specific type, like only plant-based or only animal-based or, no, I just think they probably just need more protein, and it's going to vary from person to person. And that's, besides eating enough food, like making sure you're not like restricting, that's really where I encourage people to start, is with that.
Yeah. I love that you put it that way too. It's really about the other stuff, and then they'll sort of work itself out. Because I know I was working with a client a few weeks ago, and she has PCOS, and she's like, "You just need to tell me what kind of carbs to eat." And I'm like, "I can't tell you what kind of carbs to eat. We're going to work on all of this other stuff, and I think you'll figure it out." And she was a little frustrated by my answer, but. A few weeks later, and she's already starting to feel a little bit better about.
Yeah, I was like, listen to Kristin; yeah. She knows what she's talking about. yeah.
So then I want to go into a little bit more of some of like the medical treatment of PCOS, which is something that I don't have a ton of experience with. So there are common medications and nutrient recommendations for PCOS, like metformin as a medication or omega-3s as a supplement. But one that is less talked about, and I have heard you talk about, is inositol. So can you talk a little bit more about inositol, what it is, and its role in PCOS?
Yes. So inositol is really exciting because, like you said, metformin is pretty much the standard thing that people are prescribed at this point to help with PCOS. And metformin is an insulin sensitizer. And I think the recent research I was reading, it was said between 75 and 95% of people with PCOS have high circulating insulin levels. And so that's why metformin, which is a drug that we often hear about with diabetes, why that's so commonly prescribed. And people with PCOS, of course, need a lot more metformin than people with diabetes need because of their insulin levels are so high. And so it's always been kind of like this head scratcher, like, why are these insulin levels so high? What's going on? And this is where inositol has kind of come in. So what we know about inositols is it basically brings me back like to, okay, this is why as dietitians we need to take biochemistry because of inositols. But inositols are secondary messengers. They're a part of B vitamins. I think there's 9 different types and 2 different types, the myo-inositol and D-chiroinositol. Again, biochemistry at its finest, are 2 that have been really been highlighted with PCOS. And to understand inositol, I think it's important to know what it does for people who don't have PCOS or any kind of like insulin resistance or any insulin issues. So I don't have any of those at this point in my life that I'm aware of. And, when I have when I eat something, food gets broken down into smaller pieces and turns into glucose, and the body releases insulin to help take that glucose and open the door of a cell and give us energy. It gives me energy. And I often think of insulin like a doorman. It opens the door, the food goes in, we feel energized. And with PCOS, going too far ahead with that door, if it ever gets stuck, if it starts to get like kind of sticky, what the body will do is it releases what people are theorizing in the biochemistry world is that it releases these 2 or maybe even more inositols, and that helps like to be almost be like WD-40 to the door jam, and so the doorman can open the door. Insulin can open the door and get energy. So with PCOS, what the theory is at this point is that there's either a defect or a deficiency in inositols in these 2 different types. And so when the body is trying to like open up the door and it's sticky, it's not able to send in the WD-40. So the body just releases more insulin and more insulin and more insulin. And so when that happens, when insulin goes up like that, it is just so pushing that inflammation to be higher and makes more hormones get out of whack and could be behind so many of the consequences of PCOS. Mm-hmm. So by supplementing with inositol has been really exciting. The research is really exciting with PCOS. It probably is going to be something that's prescribed. They're going to probably have some medical grade formula that they're going to make up and sell for $1 billion. And then we'll have to get it from our doctors. But for right now, it's just in a supplement form. And the research is evolving a lot. And so as I say this, I'll date myself within the next couple of years with this because it's constantly changing. But at this point, as this is recording, the recommendation is a 40-to-1 ratio of the myo to D-chiro inositol because that's the naturally occurring amount for those of us without PCOS or any insulin stuff. And something else that's really cool about inositol is that by supplementing with inositol with PCOS, not only does it sort of act like metformin, it has like an insulin sensitizing effect, but it seems to really get to some more of the core issues of PCOS. And we know PCOS starts in the hypothalamus, which is in our brain, of course. And the hypothalamus is where our mood, that's where it's controlled. And for so many people, anxiety and or depression or ADD or bipolar disorder, like so many different mood disorders are part of the PCOS experience for my clients that inositol seems to be doing something with that. So much so that it's now being studied to just treat anxiety, period, outside of PCOS.
Oh, cool.
It's also being studied to treat insulin resistance outside of PCOS. There's something to this inositol thing, and it's only going to get more interesting, I think, and so definitely stay up on it. And here's the catch-all, really important. Definitely listen up to this part. Anyone listening who's like, wow, I want to start taking inositol, is don't just buy it from anybody because I feel like I'm jaded in supplement industry because I feel like they prey on vulnerability, and no one is more vulnerable than someone with PCOS who is trying to have a baby. I feel like that is, you don't mess with maternal desire. I have my own infertility history, and I remember I would do anything to get pregnant. And, you can feel really vulnerable. And so inositol supplements, there's a lot of really bogus ones. There's a lot that don't have the right ratio. There's a lot of them that don't, when they test them, they don't even have inositol in them.
Oh, gosh.
So if you're going to buy an inositol supplement, make sure it is third-party tested, which basically means, because the FDA doesn't regulate supplements in the United States, it just means another party is looking into it to making sure that you actually have in there what you say you have in there. And it has to also have that 40-to-1 ratio of myo to decairo. And if anyone's listening is like, oh my gosh, this is way too much biochemistry, I can't remember all these details. I had a nutrition grad student work for me for a couple years, and she wrote a fabulous blog post on this. So if you go to my website, it's juliedillonrd.com/inositol. All of that will be in there. And there is one product or one company that sells a inositol supplement that I currently recommend. I want there to be more, but I still haven't found another one that has the criteria that I need, like third-party tested and the right ratio. So there's information about that brand in there too. So just be choosy who you get it from. And I feel like before cutting out carbs and doing all those things that people were told with PCOS, looking at these supplements and making sure you're eating enough is going to do so much to help your body just feel like everybody else is feeling. You know? So anyway, I hope that helps, certainly for someone listening who's like trying to find another thing to try to help.
Yeah, that was awesome. And that was such a good explanation. I love that.
Thanks.
You explained that better than I could have. And I've done some, preliminary research on inositol, and I will link that article because I do think that it's important to direct them to, both more information and a supplement that you trust, because the industry is so unregulated. And so, so making sure that it's from a good source if they are wanting to try it. I do have one follow-up question for listeners who are like, okay, I want to go buy this inositol supplement, and I'm going to go to Julie's site and find out which one she recommends. If they are taking something else like metformin, do they need to discuss with their doctor before they take something like inositol? Will it will have an effect?
So always. For sure, ask your doctor before you take anything.
Yes, of course.
I feel like disclaimer.
That is the caveat always.
And inositol is compatible with metformin. It's compatible with pregnancy and lactation. The only people who I would say, always talk to your doctor or healthcare provider. But the only people that I would say pause is if someone has really hardcore, I don't know, there's probably a better clinical way to say this, but IBS. Very few. I think I've only had probably a half a dozen out of hundreds of people with PCOS that I worked with who've had some negative side effects because of how they derive the inositol, the type of plant that they get it from can cause some more IBS for some people, but most of the people with IBS I work with, it hasn't caused any problem, but there have been a few people. So talk to your healthcare provider, and if you have IBS, just pause, but it is compatible with metformin and pregnancy and lactation. So that is awesome, I think.
Yeah, that's really good to know. And that's good to know too, that if somebody is experiencing digestive problems, even though it's rare, that they have an idea of where it's coming from, because I know that could be scary. Like, where did this come from? Especially if they have experienced IBS or something like that. Yeah. Thank you. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about stress and its effect on PCOS, because I don't think this is talked about enough, especially in the nutrition world, because it seems unrelated, but it isn't, is it?
No, it's not. So what we know to be true is that stress has a really big part of our health. And when I say stress, I don't necessarily just mean like, oh, I'm stressed out about a test I have to take, or I don't know, something like that. Stress can be from so many different places. And the majority of stress and how it affects our body comes from just the systems of life. If we live in the way we're living our life, not necessarily our way, but the body that we live in. So if our body is one that's consistently marginalized, or we're living in poverty, or we don't have a lot of power in our community, those are things that cause stress, to the point where researchers have been able to determine that when people are oppressed and marginalized because of their body, maybe they live in a larger body, or they're a person of color, or they're transgender, or they're living a life where they're constantly feeling like not at home in their own skin, that leads to more inflammation and more higher blood pressure, all those things. And when that comes to PCOS, that is not like, that's just going to make it worse. Yeah. And so I firmly believe people with PCOS, if I had my way, I would want to put them in a bubble that's cozy and the perfect temperature. I almost said warm, but like perfect temperature. A lot of my clients with PCOS and they sweat a lot. So like maybe not too warm, but cozy and protected and full of healthy boundaries, making sure there's enough sleep. I really feel like my clients with PCOS that I've worked with, and I wonder if you're the same way, they probably need more sleep than other people. And sleep disorders are really common with PCOS. And so making sure there's boundaries with sleep so you have good sleep hygiene, so that helps manage stress. And doing things like yo-yo dieting or just any kind of chronic dieting or over exercises, that also promotes stress. And what we know with stress that I feel like will be even more tangible is stress in all those different ways that I was just talking about. We know that it makes blood sugar higher. Yeah. So my first 5 years as a dietitian, well, I guess the first like 7 or 8, because you can't be one right away, but I was a diabetes educator. And what we noticed is our clients who are super stressed, even if they were like eating and moving the same way, and we were trying to match their insulin to their food intake, because that's what you do with diabetes. When they were super stressed, they would need more. And we're like, what's going on? And it was just stress that was making their body make more. And the reason why is, when we were evolving into these people we are today, when we were having to run from a lion, the body would release adrenaline and cortisol and blood sugar to help us like have fuel in our muscles so we could run fast to get away from a lion. Yeah. And so when we're marginalized or dieting, our body thinks we're running from a lion. So when you're experiencing PCOS, however you can like live your life so you're not running from a lion, which a lot of it is privilege, honestly. Like a lot of us just can't choose that because, we are who we are. But, fighting for as many people as possible to not have their bodies marginalized is always what I'm about for that reason. And then also trying to set up your life as much as you can to not have to run from a lion will help your PCOS for sure. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I know there is so much out of our control when it comes to stressors just in life, whether it is being marginalized or, it's whatever situation we're in, stress at work, at home. But I talk a lot about I talk about it on Instagram, and I use a hashtag simple self-care. And it's like the whole idea behind it is, it's not my hashtag. I didn't come up with it. I'm sure somebody else came up with it. But the idea is that like however you can care for yourself just to bring that stress level down, it doesn't need to be crazy. I actually just recorded a podcast for Mother's Day about like self-care. Taking care of yourself doesn't have to be manicures and bubble baths, right? Like it can just be something to like take a few deep breaths and kind of try and bring your stress levels down on a daily basis because of that, the inflammatory effect of stress, and how it affects our life in so many ways, and PCOS and other hormonal conditions like that. So good. So is there anything else that you would like to share with my listeners when it comes to a food peace approach to PCOS?
So I feel like it's important for everyone to know with PCOS, like no matter where you are in your experiences, how long you've known you had it, what type you have, is that food peace is possible for you. And by food peace, what I mean is to feel more at home in your own skin and to trust that you and your body can make the best choices for you. And yeah, I feel like everybody has the ability to have access to food peace, and I'm hopeful that they'll be able to connect with it in their own way. And the way to really start with it again is to move away from torturing your body, whether it's dieting or cutting out carbs or anything like that. That's going to be the first step to feeling more at home in your own skin.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So can you share where my listeners can find you then?
Sure. So if you have PCOS and you want to know more about the course that I have for people with PCOS, it's pcosandfoodpeace.com. And then I have a website that has lots of blog posts, especially on PCOS, and you can get to that at juliedillonrd.com.
It is a great resource. I've read a lot of your articles and your podcast too.
Thank you.
Your podcast is a wonderful podcast too. It's almost it's a breath of fresh air in the podcast world too, because it's a little bit different than some of the other podcasts. So I'm just going to leave it at that and have them go. If they're listening to my podcast, they listen to podcasts, and have them go listen to the Love Food podcast as well.
I hope they do enjoy Love Food. Yeah, and it's for anybody who has a complicated relationship with food, just wanting to find more ways to feel at home in their own skin. So yeah, I hope it helps.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom, Julie. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I love chatting with you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Friends, I hope you found this episode so encouraging. I know I did, not just as a woman with PCOS, because I was already familiar with Julie's work, but just as a woman who is speaking for other women who have chronic health conditions and who might be struggling with something like a hormonal imbalance or another health condition in which their doctor is urging them to lose weight, and that losing weight or going on a diet is the only answer to fixing their health problem. And they're not even considering the other options when it comes to really nourishing our bodies in a way that is sustainable, because we know diets don't work long term. And I think Julie explained it so well in today's podcast, and I think she was so encouraging for women who have PCOS or other hormonal imbalances, or who are really just trying to get off that diet train and be able to confidently say that they don't need to diet in order to live a healthier life, to nourish their bodies, and that no matter what their body size, they deserve to nourish themselves, be nourished, and not be pressured in that way. She gave some incredible insight into inositol and other ways of treating PCOS without just simply cutting out your carbs or going on a diet. And so I hope that you found all of this encouraging and inspiring. And please don't forget to check the show notes for all of the links to all of the things that Julie mentioned throughout the podcast. Thank you, friends, so much once again for listening to the Healthy Balance Mama podcast. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and give it a star rating or a review on iTunes. Every rating, review helps this podcast be seen and heard by more women who need to hear it. So I deeply appreciate it. If you want to find me, you can find me at healthymamakris.com or the newly launched Supermama Society, where I help you nourish your healthy mama life without dieting. Don't forget to follow along with me on Instagram and Facebook at Healthy Mama Kris, and join us in the Healthy Mama Live Facebook community, a free space to connect with other women who want to nourish themselves and their families without the diet dogma. Have a beautiful day, friends. See you next episode.